I'm coming to you live from Chicago this evening, where thousands of middle-class Americans showed up for one of the biggest protests for the 99% to date. 7,500 protesters from 5 different groups gathered at the Art Institute of Chicago to push for issues like fully funding schools and, of course, jobs. The group calls itself Stand Up Chicago and has been working for months on this protest. Occupy Chicago, an offshoot group of the Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, was just really part of the movement. This is growing across America. The protests have captured the attention of the world, and Republicans on Capitol Hill, what are they doing? Well, they're vilifying the effort of the American people in the streets. Here is House Majority Leader Eric Cantor at the Value Voters Summit this weekend.
I, for one, am increasingly concerned about the growing mobs occupying Wall Street and the other cities across the country. And believe it or not, some in this town have actually condoned the pitting of Americans against Americans.
Eric Cantor is and has been a mouthpiece for the Tea Party, who doesn't have the guts to face the pain his policies have inflicted on the middle class in this country. Cantor's words, I think, insulted the great Americans that I met with today here in the Windy City.
And we're not a mob. If you call this a mob, it's a mob for something positive, not for nothing negative.
I don't care about taxes. I pay my taxes. I pay more if I had to. You know, I'm more about people who are hurting. You know, my folks are losing their house. You know, they lost their jobs. They got disabled. And then after the financial crisis hit, it wiped out all their savings.
We need to change and get money out of the political system so that the people can actually have their voice back again.
I believe that they shouldn't get special privilege. The banks, Wall Street, that they deserve to get taxed. If democracy is supposed to be by the people and for the people, why do they get these loopholes? And why is it you basically have to be a millionaire to be a senator?
So you would have been out here today if there was an Occupy Wall Street or not?
Yes, I would have.
This has been going on for some time.
Yes. I think people are finally waking up and realizing that if they don't do something about it, the corporations are just going to take over.
What are your expectations of all of this?
Well, I hope people wake up. Vote. That's the important thing. Everybody gets out there and vote. Democracy works.
What I believe is that everyone that got bailed out in their time of need, they need to give back. They need to bail us out down here on the street level, on the grassroots level. It's a shame that million-dollar, billion-dollar industries got bailed out, and people who are just barely making it, trying to decide whether they're going to eat or pay their rent, we're struggling.
You described it the best when you said the Postal Service was a government agency that worked incredibly well. With so many employees, it still managed to make payroll. And if we didn't have to pre-fund our retirement, we would be even making a profit.
I'm a librarian, Chicago public school teacher, proud to be one. And they're cutting libraries all across the country, especially here in Illinois.
We need to put America back to work and get our country back up and going so everybody in this country can have a job and just live the American dream.
This is a mob, I guess if you want to call it a mob, of concerned middle-class people who are concerned about the way this country is going. Young people, old people, middle-aged people like me. Yeah, if we're a mob, I'm glad to be a part of this mob. I think it's fantastic. I love it.
The middle-class mob I saw was filled with hardworking Americans who just want a level playing field with the top 1%. Nancy Pelosi hammered Cantor for his stupid remark.
I didn't hear him say anything when the Tea Party was out demonstrating, actually spitting on members of Congress right here in the Capitol, and he and his colleagues were putting signs in the windows encouraging them. But let's not get down to that.
Do you think Pelosi is spot on, and she is the first Democrat to call out the Republicans for smearing and mischaracterizing this movement, these protests. But hold it there, folks, it gets worse. Congressman Peter King of New York made this outrageous comment about demanding how the media quit covering the 99% movement.
It's really important for us not to be giving any legitimacy to these people in the streets. In that, I'm old enough to remember what happened in the 1960s when the left wing takes to the streets and somehow the media glorifies them, and it ends up shaping policy. We can't allow that to happen.
Can't allow that to happen. Isn't it amazing how all of the right-wingers in Congress are against freedom of speech all of a sudden? They were for it when the Tea Partiers were out there, but now Heck, they can't let them go out there and give them any legitimacy or any coverage for that matter, because they might end up shaping policy. I am absolutely amazed that Peter King is getting a pass by the media for saying what he said on Friday on Laura Ingraham's radio show. Let's just get into this a little bit more. He says, I remember what happened in the 60s when the left wing took to the streets and somehow the media glorified them and end up shaping policy. We can't allow that to happen. Well, I'm old enough to remember the 60s as well, Congressman. And those protests were about stopping a war in Vietnam that eventually took 56,000 American lives. That was a time and period in this country when we were also fighting for civil rights, you know, so black folks could go fight, could go vote. I mean, is that what you're for? And so I asked Mr. King tonight, do you agree with Trent Lott, who said back on December 5th, 2002, that, you know what, if we had voted for Strom Thurmond, we wouldn't have had all these other problems? I mean, those two comments, what Peter King said on Laura Ingraham's radio show and what Trent Lott said back in December of 2002, there's no difference. It's a mindset of the Republican Party. If they don't hear what they want to hear, they want everybody else to shut up. But it's also that dirty little secret of the Republican Party. They got a real issue with race. And they just don't want folks out there in the street telling it like it is what they want. The 99%, they're being vilified and portrayed by Republicans as some fringe, outrageous group that doesn't represent the masses in America. That simply is not the case. Peter King, that's about the lowest thing you have ever said. You want to control the coverage? You don't have a line to this reporter. You don't have a line to this anchor. I will continue to cover this. I'm in the middle of the country tonight. I'm here in Chicago because I wanted to see if the people in Chicago were going to be saying the same things that I heard down at Wall Street in New York just a few days ago. You ought to take that road trip, Mr. King. It's remarkable what the American people are saying about how screwed up our government is and how it all goes to the top 1%. What they're saying in Chicago is exactly what they're saying in New York. And I'd venture to say it's the same thing all over the country. Get your cell phones out. I want to know what you think. Tonight's question, are Republicans afraid of the 99% movement? Text A for yes, text B for no to 622-639. You can always go to our blog at ed.msnbc.com. We'll bring you the results later on in the show. Joining me now is Robert Greenwald, founder and president of Brave New Films. He is also the producer of the new documentary Rethink Afghanistan. Mr. Greenwald, good to have you with us tonight. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
Why do you think Republicans want the media to quit covering this movement?
Well, I think that they're terrified, Ed, because what we're seeing is a real social movement. And social movements sweep politicians out of their way. Think about it. The peace movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the labor movement, none of them stood still for hack politicians. They talked about what they needed to talk about. They talked about moral issues, and they went after it strongly and firmly. And politicians damn well better run, because when the people's anger is unleashed on the right targets, which is the 1%, then we see social change.
Are you think the Republicans are more concerned about the protesters or the message that continually is getting the coverage?
Well, I think it's the message, because it's brilliant messaging, right? 99%. What are these politicians going to do? They're going to say we want 1% to elect us. We want the Koch brothers and we want Rupert Murdoch. That's our constituency. That's who we're representing. In fact, tomorrow in New York, there's going to be a march on Murdoch's home and the Koch brothers' home and others' homes, so that we begin to identify who are these 1%, who are the war profiteers and the people, the millionaires and the billionaires who are trying to control the rest of our country. And what we're seeing, Ed, really is pure, beautiful democracy at work.
Herman Cain slammed the protesters on Sunday. Here's what he had to say. Let's watch it.
It's anti-American because to protest Wall Street and the bankers is basically saying that you're anti-capitalism. The free market system and capitalism are two of the things that have allowed this nation and this economy to become the biggest in the world. Even though we have our challenges, I believe that the protests are more anti-capitalism and anti-free market than anything else.
Robert, what's your response to that soundbite?
Well, I think, look, the more slams there are, Ed, the better it is, because the more the social movement grows. Sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but, you know, I mean, all those childish kind of slanderings are an indication that this is really catching on. It's really getting people's attention. There's real concern, and there's real fear, which means that the 99%ers are doing exactly the right thing and doing it in the right way.
Do you think the 99% could be more of a political force than what we saw at the Tea Party? I mean, the Tea Party obviously had an influence on the midterms last November 2010, and we're a year away. And are these voters, I mean, are these people that are going to engage in the process? And do you think that this could be a greater political force than the Tea Party?
Well, I think what's important, again, is remember, this is a social movement. It's not about narrow partisan divisions. It's really about changing the way people of all political persuasions think about issues, work on issues, and talk about issues. And from that point of view, I think they've absolutely hit the sweet spot of our country, talking about the fact, why have so many people lost their homes, have no jobs, are spending $1 trillion on a war, when 1% of this country, 1%, Ed, has billions and millions of dollars, and their greed will never stop. The bankers' greed doesn't stop. Wall Street greed doesn't stop. We see today that Wall Street is expecting bigger bonuses than ever this year, while tens of thousands of people are losing their homes. That's a profound issue, and that's a social movement which exceeds, if you will, any kind of narrow political way of looking at it. And that's why some of these politicians are absolutely terrified, and they should be.
Robert Greenwald, always a pleasure. Good to have you with us tonight on The Ed Show. Thanks for your views. Let's turn now to Karen Lewis. She is the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, one of the groups, just one of the groups that participated in today's rally. Karen, let me ask you, why did your group take part in this rally today?
Well, we've been under attack for quite some time, but most vigorously here in the last 6 months. We have a new CEO, because of course we don't have superintendents in our school system. We have CEOs, which ought to tell you about what they're thinking about. And they came to us by saying, we're not going to fund your raise. We had a contractual raise for 4%. That was snatched. And then they said, oh, by the way, we want to lengthen your school day 90 minutes and 2 weeks. So we want you to work 30% more, but we don't want to pay you for it. And when the union said no, the leadership said no, because that's what our members told us, then they started a direct deal program and going to our members and saying, why don't you take this deal? Why don't you take this deal? So we filed an unfair labor practice. We did a bunch of things, but our members are absolutely irate about what's been going on lately.
And do you think what is happening here in Chicago is just a microcosm of what's going on around the country with public education?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're the home of Arnie Duncan. We're the home of mayoral control. A study just came out from the University of Chicago's Consortium on School Research. And one of the things they came out with was that we've had 20 years of school reform that has been a dismal failure and more PR spend than anything else. And along the way, teachers have been vilified. But it's not just in Chicago, it's a nationwide attack.
Well, where is your mayor, Rahm Emanuel?
It's a global attack.
Where is the former chief? Where is the former chief of staff of the Obama administration? Where's Rahm Emanuel on this? Is he anti-teacher?
Absolutely. He's been very clearly anti-teacher from the very beginning. He came in, he went to Springfield to try to take our collective bargaining rights away. He made it so that it would be 75%. It would take our union to strike. He was just like adamant about us not being able to strike. And then yesterday he goes on Meet the Press and said we're going to have performance pay. It's kind of hard to have performance pay when you haven't bothered to negotiate with the people doing the work. So, I mean, this mayor came into town.
I'm curious, how can you have performance pay in low-income neighborhoods that don't get the resources that other school districts get? I mean, I'm just amazed at that one. So I've got to ask you, finally, do you have the public on your side. And I guess we lost that live shot, but I want to thank Karen Lewis for joining us tonight. Thanks so much. As you can see, that this just isn't about a certain group of people. And these teachers here in Chicago have been fighting with Rahm Emanuel and trying to keep what they've got for a long time. And this protest has been in the works for some time. It just coincides a great deal with the Occupy Wall Street group. Remember to answer tonight's question there at the bottom of the screen, and share your thoughts on Twitter @EdShow. I want to know what you think.